So tēnā koutou katoa, no mai, haere mai to this session about Volunteer Canterbury. Ko tēnei tāku mihi ki ngā mana whenua o te rohi nei, ko ngā tuahuriri. Ka mihi hoki au ki ngā tohu o te rohi nei. Pula vinaka, talofa lava, malo lele, and warm Pacific greetings. My name's Nell, my pronouns are she and her, and I'm a career consultant with the UC Careers team. So at UC Careers, you can get help with all things career related, from figuring out what your dream job might be, and right through to helping you succeed in securing employment, either while you're still studying or when you've finished your degree. So we've got 40 minutes for the presentation from Glenda today. We'll have 10 minutes for questions after that, but please feel free to pop any questions you might have in the chat as they come up, and we can go back and look at those when we have the Q&A session at the end. So I'm looking forward to hearing what Glenda's got to say about Volunteer Canterbury. So welcome, Glenda, and thanks for being here today.
Thank you, and thank you to University of Canterbury for making an online event from what would normally be a face-to-face event. So we always enjoy being out at the business fairs, the commerce and legal. We often are at those fairs because we know that there's a real value to people getting some volunteering experience, and we also know that being in the community and being engaged with the community is an important part of being a UC graduate. So I'm just going to share my screen, and we'll have time for questions and answers at the end, and alternatively I will put my contact details up at the end as well. So if anyone has something in particular they want to catch up with me about, then they're welcome to do that. So let's have a look. Are you ready to make a difference? Essentially, that's what volunteering does. And while often we hear people say, I can't do very much, or does it really help? It certainly does. And we know that because people who have that experience see it happen. And I just got a quote here from Mother Teresa, who says, alone, I cannot change the world, but I can cast a stone across the waters to create many ripples. So for every person we come in contact with, and I guess COVID has given us that kind of fairly graphic, not so great example of that, we're exposed to certain communities within our life. So it might be our study groups or our peer groups, it might be a sport association, it might be a faith-based association, but there are various communities within which we all actually participate. And between all of those, we do influence. Just by being there, just by waking up in the morning and deciding how we're going to act has an influence on the people around us, essentially. You can liken it to voting if you like. You only get to vote once every 3 years in New Zealand, but if you want to make a difference in the meantime, every time you do some volunteering, you are voting for the sort of community, if you like, that you would like to see. So I always like to start a presentation with some context around volunteering in New Zealand, because not all cultures are able or have the knowledge of volunteering as we know it here in New Zealand. So that is pretty important. So today I'm wanting to cover off what is volunteering, why it's important to New Zealand, what are the benefits to you, the volunteer, are employers interested in your volunteering, and how do you go about choosing a volunteer role. So let's start with the context around that. What is volunteering? So the definition of volunteering is work that's done of one's own free will, unpaid, for the common good. Mahi aroha, so work of love. And that essentially means that things like internships, although you're not being paid, may not necessarily be considered true volunteering, because it might be something that's implicit to helping you with your degree or so on. So it's the broader sense of volunteering where what you're doing is having that ripple effect through a wider community, often people who you don't know. It's unpaid, and more importantly than it being unpaid, I guess, is that there's no expectation of any financial benefit from that. And as I said, for the common good, so for something that is going to have a bit of a ripple or trickle down effect within the community. So essentially, from that definition, volunteering is going to be done for not-for-profit organisations, and we're talking here about the formal volunteering, and the statistics that I might mention will be relating to formal volunteering. So there is informal volunteering that goes on, and that's things like walking your neighbour's dog, maybe getting them in their groceries or picking up their scripts or their medicine, and we're seeing a lot of that, particularly at the moment. And then there's what we call the formal volunteering, and that's the volunteering that still is having to carry on no matter what else is happening around the community. And that might be things like workshops where you can take your bike to get it fixed. They used to do a lot of that down at the Commons. People who are taking information to improve things like how we manage our road systems, so they might be standing taking surveys or that sort of thing, or just finding out what people want to happen around their neighbourhoods. And there might be people who accompany people who perhaps have some dementia or some disability to go walking, so that they feel that rather than being perhaps stuck inside a retirement village, say that they still are engaging with the community. And of course, one of the big things is the conservation in New Zealand, and that's really huge, particularly since COVID. There's been a lot of extra money has been put into conservation. So there's a lot of tree planting going on, and there's always a lot of maintenance around that. And essentially a lot of that needs to be looked after by those within the community. And they'll be volunteers who are being active in that area. And a lot of sort of predator entrapment type programs also that are predominantly volunteer based. So faith-based volunteering, some of the conservation projects are very hard to get numbers on, and also things like sports. So in New Zealand, sports are very big, and we have a world-class sporting athletes who on very many platforms, different sports represent New Zealand very well internationally and are rated very highly. All those sports people in New Zealand come through what is basically grassroots level, volunteer-driven support of sport in New Zealand. So all you have to do is drive past a park at a weekend to see all the cars there and all the people out who will have been preparing half-time supplies, will have been washing uniforms, will be refereeing, will be managing, will be coaching, will be transporting people to sport, all on a volunteer basis. So that gives us sort of a bit of an overview then of why the volunteering is important and what it looks like in New Zealand at this time. So when we talk about the get down to the actual why it's important, we've now got the concept of what volunteering is and now why it's important in New Zealand. The reason it's important is geographically we're quite a small nation. We're quite a large nation, I beg your pardon, but demographically we're actually only a small population. So in order for us to expect all the services that we do expect, for example, when we pick up the phone and dial 111, although there might be a time difference between where we are and receiving treatment, we do all have an expectation that whether we live, whether it's in the north or whether it's in the south of the South Island, that somebody will respond to us, that there will be services available to us. And to do that in an economic way means that people are volunteering. Plus, there's all sorts of benefits which make the way that we live in New Zealand a little bit different because of volunteering, I would say. So one of that is around connecting. And so I have some quotes here from people who, from their own personal volunteer experience, tell us that Volunteering keeps them connected to people and gives them personal satisfaction. It gives them a sense of connection and purpose in the community. I think volunteering is a great way to contribute to society, make connections and develop personal skills. This sort of connection has always been important, but increasingly when we have so many mental health issues, we have such high rates of social isolation with our young people, and at the other end of the spectrum with our older people, very high rates compared to other countries. We really need to look at what we can do to connect people to other people, and volunteering is a very good solution to that. The other contribution that many people won't be aware of is the contribution of volunteering to New Zealand's economy. Now, in volunteer centres, we know that the figures that come through in census, surveys, any sort of questionnaire that people are asked about volunteering will always be the tip of the iceberg. So many of us do things that are volunteering without even realising it. And the sport one is a big one where that happens a lot, and also around schools. So people who are helping with literacy, people who are teacher aiding, people who are just hanging out and making sure they're available for class trips out of the classroom and off school property and so on. They don't necessarily consider that volunteering. They just think that that is what is helping something that they're enjoying or that they want to support to actually happen. So essentially, when you ask people, when I go and talk to groups of people interested in volunteering, and I often can say, so who here does any volunteering at the moment? A lot of hands might not go up. By the end of the session, generally everyone can put their hand up and say that they've done some volunteering. It just is the way that we rock in New Zealand. So the government likes to put a price on these things. So they go by figures that they get through Statistics New Zealand via the non-profit institution satellite account. And that shows us that they put a dollar value on it. From memory, the last census they were using $21.18 or something like that on the dollars, on the hours being contributed. So they are estimating at the moment that formal volunteering, that's the sort of thing that we're talking about today, within the 115,000 community sector organisations that are registered in New Zealand, contribute $4 billion to the New Zealand economy. That was in 2018. It's on a par with the construction sector. So we had a Prime Minister many years ago, the Right Honourable Helen Clark, who said that if all the volunteers stopped doing what they were doing, the lights would go off in New Zealand. So a way to look at that, what that contribution of $4 billion looks like, is to consider all the construction that's going on, even in Christchurch at the moment, the high cranes. It's quite easy to see. We can see that happening. And think about that gone from the landscape. And essentially, that's the difference that would happen if we didn't have volunteers making the contributions that they make. The other thing that, as volunteer centres, because we are advocating for volunteering, we would suggest is that $21 may not necessarily reflect what some of the roles that people are undertaking on a gifting of their time basis. Probably the sort of extreme of that is here in Christchurch. We are very fortunate to have an amazing organisation called Christchurch Charity Hospital, where anaesthetists, surgeons and doctors are gifting their time, which I'm sure would be not usually charged out at that $21, whatever it is. So essentially that $4 billion, we can confidently say that it's probably significantly higher than that, but that's how the government logs it, as I say, in the non-profit institution satellite account by Statistics New Zealand. I touched on it briefly before in terms of connections and the whole mental health thing. So the contribution to wellbeing through volunteering is also something that we really shouldn't overlook or underestimate. The 5 ways of wellbeing are there: give, connect, be active, take notice and learn. Many times our volunteering is actually doing a bit of all of that. We're giving our time, obviously, we're making some connections with people, we're being more active, we're going out and doing something instead of not doing something. We're taking notice because we're probably learning something different. And if we go somewhere like a food bank, we often take particular notice of the volume and quantity of food that is being gifted and distributed around the city. So from the New Zealand Living Standards framework, which sort of sit alongside the wellbeing budget as I understand it, I had a wee look through there to see if there was a reference there to volunteering, because this government went into office saying that everyone should have the opportunity to earn, learn, care, or volunteer. So it doesn't matter which of those you're doing, they're part of that contribution to a community, to society, and to civil society. So from the New Zealand Living Standards framework, I found a couple of things: work, care, and volunteering, directly or indirectly producing goods and services for the benefit of others with or without compensation. So again, as I said, that encompasses that care and work and volunteering. So in our case, without compensation. Engagement and voice, so participating in democratic debate and governance at a national, regional or local level, such as through membership of a charitable society, a political party, or a school board. So again, that giving of your time to be part of sculpting the community into something that you think or it should be, or that you aspire to improving or creating. And throughout history, obviously, so much social change comes about through volunteering. And the women's vote, I'm fairly sure that the women who were out marching there were not being paid. We've seen that through New Zealand's history, nuclear free protests, and more recently, the high schools getting involved with the climate change call to action. So continually, that's something that we just do. As I say, we wouldn't necessarily think, oh, I'm volunteering while I'm out here walking with people who are like-minded, but it certainly is a gifting of our time to produce something that's better. So what are the benefits to you as a volunteer? Because in the good old days, people volunteered because they had time. And our surveys tell us that people don't have time to volunteer. That's why the numbers might be slipping. So what are the benefits to you, the volunteer? So I've got a few PowerPoints here that just go through those fairly quickly and simply. A sense of purpose and life satisfaction. Using existing skills and expertise to help others. We see a lot of that, particularly in mentoring roles, and also when we have older generations helping youngsters learn new things, for example. You make a real difference in the world. We can see that particularly in terms of some of the social change things that I have touched on before. You meet new people and gain a feeling of connection, and essentially that's that wellbeing one, which is particularly important when we think about some of the disconnection going on in our communities. You keep your brain and your body active. Again, that's part of that whole wellbeing, 5 ways of wellbeing, keeping active, keeping your body active and trying something new, noticing different things around you because you're in an environment you wouldn't normally be in when you're volunteering perhaps, and also keeping your brain active if you're learning new things. You're gaining valuable experience and skills, and this is where it's important if you're looking to enhance the CV, for example. The skills that you might want to match with your volunteering ideally would match with what you're studying, not always possible. So we like to encourage people who are looking at volunteering as a way perhaps to enhance their CVs and get some experience in a workplace that isn't available through a paid way to look at volunteering and consider how they will be gaining valuable experience and skills through that instead. So they may not be exact replica skills that you can carry with you but we're looking then at transferable skills. So for example, the ability to listen, if you're into architecture or project management or something like that, as this slide might indicate, you're needing the ability to listen to clients who might come to you from all walks of life, not people who you would normally be dealing with perhaps. Listen to what they're saying, what they're expressing as their need, their expectation, and then transfer that into something on paper or some form that meets those expectations and requirements. And that's essential, because if we don't know how to listen to certain people, we can't do that. So the skills that we may have gained through working alongside different people while we're volunteering can, in those cases, become incredibly useful. Improve your social relationships. Again, that's just that making new connections, learning how to act with different people around us who, again, we may not normally come across. Boosting your physical and mental well-being, we've covered that already. And finally, it's fun. I would suggest that if you're volunteering and it's not fun, you should be looking for another role. We've always got about 300 roles available with Volunteering Canterbury, so that's the first place that you could have a look. So obviously some roles aren't necessarily by nature fun. So fun perhaps is an overrated word in this case, but that you feel good about what you've done. So I've been a visitor running a book club, for example. We're out at corrections at Christchurch Men's Prison for quite some time. And it's not much fun driving out there in the middle of winter after work. I challenge anyone who was to disagree with me on a cold winter's night where it's dark when you leave. And it's pretty windswept out there, but there's always that sense of satisfaction on the drive back into town, which always seems much shorter, having been participating in something and seeing the enjoyment and the opening of minds and so on from just a simple 1 hour behind the wire. So work and income also talk about volunteering. Sorry, then I should have kind of done a bit of a hole. Are employers interested in your volunteering? And that's a really important question. If we were face-to-face and you had an opportunity to talk to some employers today at a careers fair, they would say yes, that they are. Many of them have said that to me. And so it's not something they might talk about without being asked, but it is certainly something that's of interest. Work and income talk about volunteering as a pathway to paid employment, and they talk again about the connections, getting new skills and so on. They also talk about keeping socially connected. So sometimes when we're between study and work, between places, between just a different space in our lives, it can be quite easy to get a little disconnected. So finding that social connectedness is really important. They talk here about people from all walks of life who've used volunteering as a step to finding their first or a new job, and how it helps to maintain or develop skills and gain work experiences that employers are looking for. There's a surprising variety of roles which you may not have realised in things like sports, law, linguistics, education, retail, and all manner of things which we do, for simplicity's sake, categorise on our website. And a couple of quotes from employers that I picked up from Volunteering New Zealand's website. As an employer, I've skimmed hundreds of CVs, and what often makes me stop and read a bit closer is the volunteering section. People who volunteer share several positive personality traits without even realising it. The problem is lots of people volunteer, but not everyone thinks it's worth mentioning on their CV. So please do mention your volunteering on your CV. According to research conducted by Professionals Service Network Deloitte, 82% of hiring managers are more likely to choose a candidate with volunteering experience, and 85% are willing to overlook other CV flaws when a candidate includes volunteer work. For them, volunteering illustrates a lot about your character, both as an individual and a professional, and this can be the thing that pushes you out of the CV pile and into that new position. So, volunteering in New Zealand, how do you choose a volunteering role? Motivation and time commitment. So, motivation is hopefully that you kind of want to do something out in the community, but any motivation is totally okay. As I said, motivations have changed a bit. Back a few decades, the motivation for a lot of our older people who continue to be the biggest number in New Zealand of people who are still involved with volunteering was time. They had some extra time on their hands. So people would retire and they would have some time on their hands. These days, people often are moving and we're not sure what it looks like long term for us as a society, but we have people now increasingly choosing to live when they can in retirement villages, for example, where they have a support system around them, where they have things on site that they can enjoy, so they can make the social connections there, they can participate in some hobbies there perhaps. So they do not necessarily need to go back into the wider community for that social engagement. So what that means long-term for volunteering isn't necessarily that great, and Volunteering Canterbury does hope to put together a pilot to re-engage and see what it looks like for taking people out of that environment and putting them back once a month into a community volunteer role at, for example, a community gardens, a curtain bank, an op shop, or packing food, just to continue that engagement with the wider community. We've also found a lot of our older people hitting retirement age who don't move into retirement, who keep staying in paid employment because that's a reflection really of the cost of living. And there's also increasingly in New Zealand grandparents moving into caregiver roles for their children's children, so that they can perhaps continue to work in full-time roles, whereas previously they may have moved out of paid employment or into a part-time employment situation. So let's touch firstly on motivation. You need to ask yourself, particularly when you're looking for through a database like the one that we have on our platform of nearly 300 volunteer roles, why you want to volunteer. And the reason for that is you're gifting your time. You're not getting paid for it, but it is incredibly precious and it needs to be of value to you. So whether it's because you want to meet new people or pick up skills, or because you are passionate about a particular issue or organisation, be clear before you start looking. And I say that because it can be a candy shop when we hear about what people are doing. And that's absolutely fine. If you had all the time in the world to spare, then you might want to play around and try some different experiences. But usually we don't have a lot of spare time, and I believe that people should be getting something that's a benefit to them, even if it's just that feel-good experience that you mightn't be getting because of the nature of the work that you're in. You might want to go off and do something that's a bit of fun, just to balance that out, that add that into your work, volunteer, play balance, if you like. Why do you want to volunteer and what's your motivation? They could be one and the same, but we certainly want to think about what our motivation is. If our motivation is along the lines of why we want to volunteer, or a bit stronger, and that motivation then it sounds kind of the same as why I want to volunteer, but where you then look for your volunteer role might be, I want to volunteer because I want to make some connections. What is my motivation? I want to volunteer because I want to make connections with people from a different ethnicity, for example. So it's a little bit of kind of narrowing down before you start looking for your volunteer role. you can consider it a little bit like a regular job search, actually. And I'd also encourage you, if there's any processes that you go through as a volunteer looking for a volunteer role, you treat them very much as responsible, with the same responsibility as going, and commitment as going into a role where you're not being paid, where it is a volunteer role. It's an opportunity to have a bit of a practice, if you like, at an interview session, ask questions, and just get a feel for what it feels like before you get that experience of essentially what is a workplace, but where most people aren't paid. We talked earlier about 115,000 not-for-profit organisations in New Zealand. Only 10% of the people engaged with those organisations are paid roles. So essentially there's a huge amount of volunteering going on in every registered charity around New Zealand. What you need to think about also is your commitment. So you have rights and responsibilities as a volunteer, similar to those in the workplace. You need to, if you're making a commitment and it's to so many hours a week, be available those hours a week. You don't want to overcommit. So you need to consider, for example, study commitments. You're the only one that is aware of your particular study timetable, your deadlines, and when you're supposed to be doing what you're supposed to be doing with other people in study groups and tutorials, for example. So your responsibility to sort those out and sort your volunteering, if you're doing some volunteering, around that. Also, any other interests that you've got going, if you've got some musical, again, there might be responsibility you already have in terms of that to a group that you practice with, and similarly with sport. And whānau. If you're living away from home, that whānau then will be perhaps your flatmates. It might be that you are committed to cooking for the flat, for example, one night a week. So it wouldn't necessarily be very cool to turn up and say, I can't do that because I'm volunteering now. You might want to sort your schedule so that it's possible, but certainly remember that you've got other commitments before you think about committing to volunteering. Overcommitting causes stress. Stress is not good for our well-being, and we really need to be maintaining our well-being. One of the other things is a financial. There should be no financial burden for volunteers. So look for things that are local that you can get to easily, that don't have a cost for transport, for example. You'll also see on our website that you can get reimbursed for some travel costs by some of our agencies. So the world is changed by your example, not by your opinion. And that speaks very clear of the power of your volunteering. So just a quick look now, because that hopefully has made you have a think about volunteering, and hopefully going to have a few questions that you might come back to me with. But let's have a little look now at what our website looks like. This is a Volunteering Canterbury website, vulcan.org.nz, and if you click onto any of these, I'll tell you what we do. But if you're looking for a volunteer opportunity, if you click on to volunteer opportunities, you're taken to this volunteer recruitment platform. So in terms of how to use that, probably my best advice is always to flip through the categories, and I mentioned the candy store thing in there. If you're looking for something to help you with marketing, then don't get distracted up the top here with arts and crafts or animal care. Flick all the way down and see what's there and how it might be of use to you. If you're studying something in relation to youth and children, you might want to click on youth and children, and under that will then be displayed all the roles that are listed under that category. And in this case, there's a couple of pages of them. So you see something that might be of interest. So for example, a workshop volunteer with Star Jam. They're looking for passionate individuals who want to join a fun movement for positive social change. And it's evenings and weekends. And you might think, evenings and weekends would suit me better, and in all areas. So if you click on this one, that'll give you the full role description. And there you'll find that what you're going to be doing is supporting and supervising young people 6 to 25 years with disabilities to be involved in performing arts. You'll be also required to support them they have an annual gig. If anyone's heard of Star Jam, you'll know that these are awesome young people that you'll be working alongside. And so they have a roster for their workshops that happen around Christchurch during the week, in various places. So always after school times because of the age of some of the people who come along to those sessions. You're going to be reliable and positive with good communication skills, and a police background check will be required for that role. And that's because you are working alongside vulnerable people. So the first step, if you're interested in finding out more about that role, is to fill in the form and click apply, and your contact details will be sent through to the volunteer coordinator at Star Jam, and they will be in touch with you. If you don't know anything about Star Jam and you want to have a wee peek at what they're all about, you'll find there more information about them here, and all the roles for Star Jam are listed separately under that. And you can pop onto their website also and see what they're doing. So that's a bit of an idea of the website. We do also post roles that we see that sort of we think might be of use to some students. We post them on the NZ Uni Talent. It's changed its name, sorry, so that's gone right out of my head at the moment.
Oh, you've got it right, Glenda, it is NZ Uni Talent.
That's it. So yeah, so have a look. We post the odd thing out there as well. If you've got any more questions, that's my contact details there. And yeah, thank you again for the opportunity to sort of hopefully give you some ideas about how volunteering, we know it's going to benefit the community, but how it might also be of a benefit to you where you are right now in your own life. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Glenda. I, for one, would strongly endorse everything Glenda has said about the benefits of volunteering, both personally for the community and for your own professional development as well. You know, we're often talking to students about the value of volunteering to get experience, get a foot in the door, develop skills, make connections with people who might be able to act as referees. There are just so many benefits to volunteering. And I would also add that, you know, it's pretty hard to find a job that will satisfy all of your interests and all of your values. So often volunteering can be a really valuable way to be able to live all of your values and all of your interests all within the space of a week or a month, so that everything is being satisfied. So yeah, thanks again, Glenda. Has anyone got any questions for Glenda? I think you've covered it so well, Glenda, I can't even think of any questions myself.
So as I said, welcome to have a look on the website or contact me if you do have any questions. And this is being recorded, so my contact details are on the very last slide. So you can scroll through there to find that if you need to get in touch with us.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Glenda.
Cool. Thank you. Thank you, Richard.
Oh yeah, I just have one small question.
Yes, Andy.
Given that we are doing volunteering because of the common good, so I'm wondering who organized this volunteering event and who funded this. Yeah, I'll just make sure what kind of capital we're serving.
So who organizes a roster for when you volunteer? Is that what the question is?
Yeah, who organized this volunteering event like this? Yeah.
So it sounds to me, Glenda, like Andy is asking who organises the volunteering. So if Andy were to sign up for some volunteering, who would be
if you sign
facilitating
up, so like that Star Jam job that we looked at, your application would go through to the volunteer coordinator, and then they would contact you and they would say, Andy, you've expressed interest in this role, and what is your availability, that sort of thing. So you negotiate that with the organisation. So the organisation may have said very clearly in the information about the role, it's available on Wednesdays between 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock. And so if you're not available, then don't apply for the role. But if they're saying flexible hours or various options and on the roster available, then you just have that discussion with them.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yeah, okay, sure.
Thank you.
And I think too, maybe Andy, you mentioned something about like, where's the funding coming from?
Yeah, that's also the other part of my question. Yeah.
So the funding for the organisations?
Yeah.
Yep. So in New Zealand, the not-for-profits are funded basically wherever they can find the funds. So one of the biggest funders probably for most organisations would be able to tap into would be the Lotteries Fund, and that is organised through the Department of Internal Affairs. So Internal Affairs runs or oversees lotteries, and they also have other funds that they also administer. So for example, they administer a fund called the Support for Volunteering Fund, and that has a chunk of money in it that is distributed around volunteer centres and Volunteering New Zealand. Volunteering New Zealand sits in Wellington. They don't recruit volunteers, but they do a lot of advocating for volunteers. So if there's a bit of legislation, for example, going through Parliament around working conditions, they'll be looking at that to see if there's a possibility to include something around volunteers and workspaces and that sort of thing. So places that are very well known, like the Cancer Society, SPCA, a lot of those have bequests, so they're getting bequests in from people who have perhaps been involved in a journey with them, and raise donations, and op shops also. So if you see a charity shop that's SPCA, St John, St Vincent de Paul, Red Cross, Salvation Army, they're all fundraising. All the funds that are coming through those charity shops are going into the organisation. And generally that's around operating expense, because as I said earlier, only about 10% of everyone involved in the not-for-profit sector is actually earning a wage. And a lot of those wages are coming from contracts from places like, so for example, Ministry of Social Development. So that's kind of where we're funded in Christchurch. Volunteering Canterbury was established by a past mayor's wife who thought a volunteer centre would be a great thing to have. And we continue to enjoy good support from Christchurch City Council. And our other main funder is an organisation called Rata Foundation, which is just a South Island based charity. Good question though, thank you.
Yeah, great question, Andy.
Okay, thank you so much. Yeah,
no problem.
I'm out of question.
So we've just got about 4 minutes left. Do you have any other questions, Andy?
No, I'm out of question now.
Great, thank you. Any questions you came up with, Richie? Or Aaron?
I only tuned back in for the last 10 minutes, so that's pretty much been questions. I hate to go run on air and hey them. Oh, I'll turn my camera on. Sounds like it went all good though. Just turn back in, back up. I just had to leave my desk for the first time today.
Oh, it must have been a relief for you.
It was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was actually in a similar boat to Aaron there. We had a few students come in right at the beginning of the presentation. I only got back for the last last part, but I would have really liked to have heard more about Starjam. That aspect of the presentation sounded really interesting.
Oh, it's okay. You might be able to catch up with that on the recording, Richie.
Yeah, exactly what I was planning on doing actually.
Cool. Yeah, it sounded quite interesting to me too.
We'll be out, hopefully. The Student Volunteer Expo will still go ahead later in the year.
Yeah, hopefully.
So we partner with UC for that, and that's usually has about 25 or 26 different organisations who turn up, who are specifically looking to recruit, and you guys get notice of who they're going to be, so you kind of can get your questions ready in advance. So they always go home with a lot of homework, people to follow up with. Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to stop the recording because we've just got yourself, Glenda, and then UC people left on here. And we'll leave it there for people who are going to tune in and look at the video later. They can access your contact details, as you mentioned earlier in that last slide.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Glenda.
Bye.